Hi, welcome to the Fit and Healthy Today show. And today our topic matter is why certified organic. Now here in California, we had a proposition, Prop 37, on the ballot, which would have required that any food that was genetically modified and altered be labeled. But because of massive advertisement on TV by some of the major pesticide and herbicide funders, such as Monsanto, that bill was defeated. So I want to go over organic and why it's important that you know where you get your organic food from. So first of all, let's look at the definition of organics based upon the Organic Food Production Act of 1990. And what that does, in order to be certified organic, it requires a government inspection and certification. It costs a little bit of money, not a lot, so don't let somebody tell you at a farmer's market, oh, it costs me too much to get their certification. Unless somebody's certified organic, you can assume it is not organic produce. Definition is foods produced using natural methods that do not include synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides, and they're also produced using no irradiation, industrial solvents, or food additives. The animal designation is the animals have to be raised without antibiotics or growth hormone. In the state of California here, growth hormone is not permitted, particularly amongst poultry. So, nowhere in here does it say that the organics have to be genetically and modified, altered free. So, here's the crux. There are a lot of major corporations who sell organics, and here's some local, here in Lompoc, some local places that claim organics that are corporations that will not or cannot confirm whether they're genetically modified and altered foods. So that's very important that you know that delineation. It's important that you trust your store owner or the place where you buy your food from. Now, when we're talking about why certified organic, number one, you know that it's going to be free of synthetic pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers. The meat is going to be free of antibiotics as well as growth hormones, and the feed that are fed to the animals will be such as well. When we look at specifically why we want to really look at thinking about doing certified organics, there's several reasons. Number one, when we look, the crop yields. Now, here in the United States, the studies that were done by the University of Michigan found that the crop yields were no different between organic and non-organic. Now, it costs more to farm non-organic because the expense of all the chemical fertilizers and pesticides, but the yields were almost equal. Now, in developing countries, because the soil is much richer, they've rotated the crops, just richer foods in developing countries. The food production on in organics was double or triple using organic farming methods. So, no matter how much they may try to convince us that we need to feed the world with all these chemicals, the studies say otherwise, and this is not the only study that stresses that. Now, when we look onward too as to why organics are better for the environment. So you environmentalists out there need to be addressing this issue because we have tons of runoff into our water supply, our other food supply, and all the creatures and fowls and everything around of all this pesticide and herbicide when the watering and irrigation is done on these fields. So literally this runoff gets to in our lakes, into the water that we drink. And mind you, these are neurotoxins and estrogen mimickers. And we'll go on to the health detriments regarding eating or being exposed to pesticides and herbicides. So they literally destroy rivers, lakes, streams, and then to the ocean they go. And we know even with situations like the Peregrine falcon when we had the DDT exposure. But we have chemicals that are nearly just as harmful as the banned DDT. And if you're getting organics that are from outside this country, chances are you're getting DDT anyway. So, soil erosion and greenhouse emission, all these chemicals release a lot of greenhouse and carbon dioxide emission. Come on, environmentalists, address these issues. You're busy worrying about our cars and fossil fuels. Hey, what about this? Because this far exceeds amount of emissions and environmental toxicities than we're looking at petrochemical fuels coming from cars. Increased pest resistance and loss of biodiversity. So our soils are pretty much dead. The pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers destroy these little soil-based organisms that help the food be beneficial and healthy. They're good bacteria, and the nutrition is affected as well. But these pesticides also cause the pests to become more resistant. There's natural ways in which you can fight off the bug infestations, and you can research that a little bit further or speak to a local organic farmer and they'll tell you, they'd be happy to talk to you about what they do. Now, when we're looking at some of the quality of the produce and meat, I know everybody says, oh, there's no difference. And some of the recent stuff that come out, but when I look at the studies or the recent stuff that says, oh, there's no difference in the quality of nutrition, I know it's bogus. Because if I'm going to throw fertilizer, natural organic, I'm going to throw in worms and everything else in the soil, it only stands to reason that we're going to have richer, more nutrient-dense foods. And I'm going to cite some studies here. The study by the Washington State University showed that strawberries, for example, that were organic, had much higher antioxidant activity and vitamin C. They also had a longer shelf life and better flavor. Obviously, if you've tasted an organic tomato versus a store-bought tomato that's not organic, you can tell the difference. More genetic diversity. The soils are nitrogen-rich. Microbials are crawling in and out and moving those good bacteria and nutrients into your food. So the foods have more enzyme activity and micronutrients. In the 1993, a study that was done given in the Journal of Applied Sciences said that organics sustained more than 4 times the trace minerals than non-organic produce. An interesting study out of the UK, Britain, showed cows who, bottom line, grazed on, what we call grass-fed types of, they go out and do pasture-fed, and they come and get milk, better quality milk, including higher amounts of fats, CLA, a key fatty acid in milk, the antioxidants, and the vitamins were richer than conventional. So having our cattle in a non-organic form all scrunched up, never putting their noses into the ground of soil-based organisms, does not yield us good quality milk. When we look at poultry, now this is a huge issue, and there has been some television coverage about this issue. The University of Maryland study, and I'll read this verbatim, states that organic poultry farmers have fewer antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So, 67 to 84 of the chickens, think about this, were resistant. They were given so much antibiotics, they were resistant to these bacteria, whereas only 17 to 18% in organic farms were resistant to these bacteria. Organic chickens also have less or virtually no arsenic. Now, non-organic farmers give their chickens arsenic in order to make them get bigger. Now, have you ever heard of anything called arsenic poisoning? Well, it's very common among conventional chicken eaters to have high arsenic levels, and that comes with its whole bowl of wax as far as health issues are concerned, because arsenic obviously is a cancer-causing agent. The USDA and doctors confirm that organic grass-fed beef harbors a significantly reduced risk of mad cow disease. This mad cow disease pretty much goes into the brain and eats up the brain, literally a very painful way to die. And with the lack of ability to inspect by the USDA of these non-organic farms, because the personnel is very limited, boy, whenever you can get this grass-fed organic beef, or any of these types of things, go for the meat. I know it's more expensive. It is going to be more expensive because they're not sitting there pumping them full of chemicals and arsenic and everything else to make them big. They're natural and they're nutrient dense. You know, the federal government came out with a study that basically addressed that grass-fed beef did not raise the risk of arterial sclerosis, even with fat pieces, because it has a CLA content in it, whereas your good old grocery store beef does. So think about that. Now, our health. You got to shake your head, and I could go on for hours on this, and with the amount of studies that were done. And when they say there's no studies that show pesticides and herbicides cause harm, they're full of bunk. They're just not telling you the truth, and they can say that all day long. If you tell a lie over and over again, eventually people believe you. That was done by Adolf Hitler, and apparently in this, the way our government is set up, if we tell a lie over and over again, people start to believe it is the truth. In this particular case, there are studies to back it up. Children eating organic produce had 6 to 9 times fewer toxic agribusiness chemicals in their body. And I'm telling you, we'll go on with some of the health risks of these, and I'm just mentioning a few. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, the same place that regulates our vaccines, states that chemicals used in agribusiness raise the risk of ADHD, behavioral problems amongst the kids, nervous and brain chemistry problems amongst our children. So think about that. If you've got all these chemicals pumping in and you notice that your kids are having these symptoms, when you've got this, a government agency, the CDC, stating this, that has to be considered. Studies from the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medicine showed a 70% risk of stillbirths. Stillbirths, that means a baby being born dead. 70% risk increase when exposed to sprays for ants and roaches. So a lot of these farm workers that work in the areas where they have to keep all the roaches and ants, their exposure is so great for having stillbirths. I have a friend of mine that works in one of the labor and delivery rooms, and he tells me about some of the horror stories about the missing limbs and the birth defects. We'll talk about this a little further on. I am very passionate about this subject, and it probably comes through on my voice, because these chemicals, I mean, we're so busy worried about other things. This, our food, is our life, our breath, and our health. And so as a nutritionist, I'm going to stress this. Okay, so I mentioned to you that my good friend told me about the missing limbs, the oral clefts, and the heart defects. I'll tell you, studies from the Environmental Health Perspective Journal showed a risk of blood cancer, leukemia, when the mothers were exposed to low levels of pesticide. So hence, we're hearing all of these kids with leukemia, and I'm hearing this center and that center, and fund this and fund that, you know, and buy this house to support this hospital so they can do drug research. We need to look at our own food and start looking at these studies that are being done on and how they affect our children. The American Pregnancy Association, okay, recommends if a pregnant woman lives near a commercial agribusiness area, she should relocate to a safer center away from where all the pesticides and herbicides are sprayed. Now, we have a lot of our schools here in Lompoc that are not far from this agribusiness. It scares me. It scares me a lot because we get overgrowth, and a good friend of mine brought her son in not long ago. He was sicker than a dog. He actually had trembling and everything. Now, the schools say they're doing the best they can, but obviously, once again, there's very few inspectors that are addressing these issues. This has got to be addressed for the health of our children. The National Academy of Sciences 1993 studies state that, and these are old studies, I mean, this is how old? 19 years? State that exposure of infants and children to spray produce significantly raises the risk of future cancers. We want to save money in the future for our economy and the cost of all these expensive chemotherapies and these drugs. Let's invest in this, getting clean food. New reports show that genetically modified and altered corn, primarily the seeds from Monsanto, significantly raise the risk of cancerous tumors. I mean, a lot. So much so that there's countries in Europe that say, we don't want your corn anymore. So here in the United States, genetically modified and altered corn gets made into all of our crackers and all of our high fructose corn syrup, and we're ingesting this. Okay, so whatever you can do to write your Congress people about this genetically modified and altered issues, and that they be labeled federally, is a very important thing to do. Lastly, I want to finish with the dirty dozen. In the last 25 years, pesticide and herbicide usage has risen 125%. It's gotten worse because the pests have gotten stronger. So, the National Institute of Health gave the list of the highest residual pesticide produce or items that they actually suggested, that people might want to look for organics in, because these are very heavily sprayed and have high residues. Apples, blueberries, bell peppers, broccoli, celery, cherries, grapes, lettuce of all types, particularly imported lettuce, nectarines, peaches, potatoes, and strawberry. Potatoes are sprayed with hydrazine, which is a petrochemical that we use for our jet engines. And strawberries, we want to talk here in California, they're chemical. They're so heavily sprayed with neurotoxin chemicals. But even the National Institute of Health gave up their dirty dozen list. Anyway, I hope this helps. Dive into this. Look for organic produce from a local health food store, somewhere where you can go in and say, okay, what farm does this come from? Where did you get this produce? Not some mass marketing large company that has its operations out of Germany or wherever else. Look for certified organic local produce as best you can. Next, we're going to be moving on to the fitness portion of our show. Thank you. Hi, welcome to the fitness portion of our show. And today we're going to talk about abdominals. And I don't usually get up in front of a camera with my abdominals showing, but I think it's really important that people start to recognize that they can work their abdominals and they don't necessarily have to be able to get up on the floor, and you can even stand in a grocery line and do this. First of all, becoming aware of your abdominal muscles is very important. So I usually suggest to my clients to tighten the abdominal muscles. Feel that they're there. You tighten them, okay, and you hold that tightness, if you can, for about 30 seconds. Then I have them shift it, so roll it. We learn this, I'm a belly dance instructor, and you learn to roll your abdominals, and as you have more control, and you reverse it, and as you have more control over your abdominals by rolling it, and you keep that exercise going for a couple of minutes, we can tighten the abdominal muscles and you become much more aware, and they will come in and look much more cut and beautiful. We use this exercise or something very similar to that before we do our bodybuilding shows in order to get our abdominals looking shredded when we get on the stage. But just a nice simple roll, becoming aware of your belly. And then also too, if I can state, once you're aware of your belly, it may be something that you would like to change and make a little bit more cut and more beautiful. Next, we're going to be moving on to the research portion of our show. Thank you very much. Hi, welcome to the research portion of our show. And with us today is Ralph Turchiano.
And thank you for that intro. Well, to add something to the, or I should say a twist to the hygiene hypothesis. We know we hear the hygiene hypothesis, part of the reason why there's so many more allergies out there. And we believe it may be associated with extreme cleanliness because it may affect the positive bacteria of the body and cause immune issues. But what if it wasn't necessarily the hygiene part, but it was actually the chemicals we use to maintain that hygiene that may be causing the allergies? Well, recently you may have recalled there was an additive that was added to a lot of soaps which was causing neurological conditions, including prostate cancer, muscle weakness, you name it. And remember, that chemical is also used in antibacterial soaps. And that chemical's name is something called triclosan, or Triclosan. The interesting part about it, there was a study recently done in Norway. And this is from the Norwegian Environmental and Child Asthma Study, or also run by the Norwegian Institute of Public Health. What they discovered was this. They looked at urinalysis of 10-year-old children. And the urinalysis of 10-year-old children in Norway had about 50% of those kids had triclosan. That's the antibacterial agent they add to soap in the urine. In the United States, it was 80% because we like to clean more. But there's also a caveat to that when you think about it. So when you look at the whole aspect, they drew a direct correlation between elevations of triclosan and asthma, especially in regards to immunoglobulin E and rhinitis. They found out the higher levels of these items, the higher levels of those allergic type reactions. So they drew a direct correlation, which is pretty good. And what they discovered was, after this fact, in Norway, they tried to reduce down the triclosan inside the soaps and cosmetic products, which moisture exposure is going to be cosmetic. And also antibacterial soap. And guess what? 75% of your exposure to this wonderful antibacterial chemical is from toothpaste. You would never think about that. Most of the times we're thinking antibacterial soap. So when your kids are brushing their teeth with this chemical, it's affecting the bacterial balance of their entire body, not just the skin, raising inflammatory markers, causing rhinitis all across the board. So it's something to think about. That may not be necessarily the reason for your kids' allergies. It may not be because you are clean. The more devious part is what you are actually cleaning your children with, which is causing the allergies. It's called situational awareness. Look around. Try to avoid it. If you can't find out whether your product has triclosan or not, then you shouldn't be buying it. All right, after that, let's go back to dietary stuff. One of my favorite supplements out there is obviously something called green tea. Because you hear green tea and cancer and endurance and everything else like that in metabolism. But green tea has one more interesting aspect to it, which I never thought of. The interesting part about green tea, and this was done by the online version, Molecular Nutrition and Food Research, where it was published, is the chemical in green tea called EGCG ironically inhibits an enzyme responsible for starch breakdown. Now keep this in mind, this is starch. This is not sugars. So glucose and maltose and things like soda like that, it's not going to make much of an impact on. But when it comes to breads, potatoes, pancakes, waffles, things along those lines which have a starchy, which require breakdown, green tea inhibits that. When they did a study in mice, which obviously you'll find they were feeding mice things like potato chips and you name it, things that are trying to spike the blood sugars, they found out that about the equivalent of a cup and a half of green tea reduced the blood sugar spike by about 50%, which is pretty amazing. So you're not talking a huge amount of green tea. We're talking about the amount of EGCG usually found in a quality cup and a half at a mealtime, which is phenomenally well, because you can reduce those sugar spikes down. You're going to do a lot more than just basically improve your metabolism. You're going to basically do a lot of things, prevent sugar damage, you name it. Especially if you're diabetic and you have glucose spikes all the time, this is a wonderful way of doing it. And one more interesting aspect. They found out that the EGCG from green tea reduced what's called the alpha amylase production in the pancreas by about 34%, which is pretty amazing. Now, I'm aware of white kidney bean or phospholamine and things along those lines, which have impact in reducing that down. But however, EGCG seems to work even further down the digestive tract by discouraging the pancreas from producing enzymes that are going to break down the remaining of the starches. So if you find yourself eating a starchy diet, you're not on a low-carb diet or anything along those lines, doing something simple by basically adding about a cup and a half of green tea, quality green tea, it's got to have the EGCG, is going to do wonders for your metabolism and basically your waistline much later on without adding any additional effort. So that's pretty cool to think about. All right. After that, we go down to pregnancy. Now, this is really important because pregnancy and prenatal nutrition go a long way. Well, this was discovered recently by the University of Copenhagen, and it was published in the Public Library of Science online. What it is this. They discovered that if you're deficient in this one nutrient, especially this one nutrient, it's going to play a huge role in basically whether the brain of the fetus develops properly. If you do not get enough of this one nutrient, the damage it does is not reversible, no matter what you do afterwards. because what it discovers, they found out that this one nutrient is responsible for the development of the hippocampus, an important part of the brain. This is what they discovered, that basically if you do not get enough of vitamin C, the fetus's brain does not develop properly. Even a marginal deficiency of vitamin C, the fetus's brain will not develop properly. This is one of the simplest things to make sure you get adequate amounts out of your diet. But even in the United States, somehow something has vitamin C in it, the majority of the population, for whatever reason, seems to run from it like it's some sort of taboo item. So, if you are thinking of getting pregnant, have a chance of becoming pregnant, or trying to become pregnant, it is really important, outside of other things like DHA and folic acid and iron and everything else, that you make sure your nutrition is adequate enough in vitamin C. It's not some new age or alternative medicine. We're not talking complementary. We're talking actually nutrients. When people tell you you don't need nutrients for whatever reason, ask them, well, what happens if I don't get these nutrients or vitamins? Obvious. Disability, disease, death, you name it. So don't fall for that gambit. Anytime anybody says you don't need enough vitamins or you don't need vitamins, well, what happens if I don't get any? What's the result? This is one of them, poor neurological development. And they've discovered that basically, even in the United States, 10 to 15% get nowhere near enough. That means they got scurvy. And think of it, in a modern industrialized society, we have to worry about scurvy, especially since all the overeating that's going on. All right, now we come to another one called postpartum depression. If you're not getting enough of another nutrient, and this is not difficult to get these nutrients, just that somehow, whatever it is, our food is so processed, we're not getting adequate amounts. Of another nutrient called omega-3, when that baby is developing in a pregnant mother, that baby is going to take priority from the mother. If the mother is not smart enough to be eating properly, guess what? The baby is not going to pay anywhere near as much as the mother is, because the baby will rob or take any omega-3s it possibly can to develop that brain. That baby is priority. It's counting on the mother being smart enough to eat properly in order to nourish that baby. Especially if someone wants to have a baby, nature's saying, all right, you want to have one, we're assuming that you're going to do a good job. Well, DHA, omega-3, is the best way to prevent postpartum depression. My time is limited, but there's a 6-week period of time after birth where postpartum depression kicks in. They found out most of postpartum depression is due to omega-3 deficiency, not serotonin imbalance, nothing else along those lines. Real simple, easy to fix, done in the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry, November 15th, 2012. Well, thank you very much. My time is up, and I'm done.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Once again, diet, nutrition, do your research. Thank you for joining our show.